Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Webinar Wednesdays. My name is Maria Maddox, and I will be one of your moderators for today as we look at early motor delays, how to make birth to 3 count for children with cerebral palsy. We have 3 presenters today, and I'm going to introduce them briefly, and they will tell you more about themselves as they get further into the presentation. We have Dr. Sarah Sobotka, who is a clinical instructor at in the section of developmental and behavioral pediatrics at the University of Chicago. And we also have Susan Cartland, who is Ray's mom and also is involved in advertising, as well as Angela McKenna, who is Nathan's mom and has also previously served in early intervention as a service coordinator, DT, and I think currently works as a school psychologist and having a great day at school today. For your moderators for today, again, Maria Maddox, that's me. We have Nikki Ostrowski, who is also here at the U of I, and Alyssa Jones, who is one of our research specialists at the U of I. And we will be facilitating questions and pretty much monitoring the whole session as it goes on. Wanted to let folks of you know that for those of you who are brand new to this, you will get a certificate of attendance after you complete. Hello? Okay. You will get a certificate of attendance after you complete the survey that you will get in an email very soon after the webinar is completed. So be checking for an email that says eitraining@illinois.edu. Complete that survey and you'll get your certificate. Webinars are great because we get to stay where we're at and don't have to drive a lot of places, but we don't get to see each other. So one of the things that we do try to do with our webinars is make sure it's as interactive as possible. So you have a couple of ways that you will be asked to be interactive. One is up in the top under your name, there should be 4 boxes. You've got one that the 3rd box over is a hand raise. So you might get a question from one of the presenters of how many of you have, and I don't know, fill in the blank, and they may ask you to raise your hand. It is that 3rd box under your name. Another way that we may ask you to participate is through polls, which is the 4th box under your name. And I will come back to that one here in just a second. We will also ask you to use your chat box, which is under the list of names. You should have a box that says chat. You can use this box to answer responses to questions that the presenters may have. You can use it to ask questions that we can have the presenters address. Use it to share strategies, communicate with one another, say hello to a friend you haven't seen in a long time. You can make the chat box bigger or smaller by detaching it, clicking on those little lines there. And so we do ask that when you are asked to participate in questions that please do. It makes it a lot easier for all of us. It makes it more interactive, and since we can't see your faces, we can't read you how you're gathering the information. So please use the chat. The polling function is that 4th box under your name. Right now it has a letter A in it. We might use the polls a few times today, and so we do want to kind of get an idea of who is participating. So you have a choice of 5. You can indicate whether you're a parent or caregiver, an early interventionist, CFC staff, an administrator, or other. And if you are an other, please indicate that in the chat box. So we'll give folks a few minutes to open that polling function, indicate your role, and make sure that you are using the polling function, which is that 4th box under your name. It has a letter A in it at the moment. Give folks a few more seconds here to respond. This gives us a really good idea who's in the audience since we can't see you, and do a count, face to face. So Right, let's check and see who we have listed here. So, looks like we have a large number of early interventionists with some CFC staff, a few folks who haven't responded, which is okay. So, thanks for participating and joining us. I know we have other parents as well, so even if you were multi-roles, welcome aboard. Just to also get an indication of who are our interventionists on today, I'm going to ask that you indicate what your role is in early intervention. So we'll give you another few seconds here to respond to this poll. And if you are an other, please let us know in the chat box. For instance, I'm a nurse, so I would be typing that in. I guess I should. All right, let's see. Let's see who we've got here now. Let's see what our results are. All right, so Sarah, Susan, Angela, it looks like you got a good mix of folks. PTs, speech, developmental therapy, couple of OTs. So that will give you some DTH, it looks like. Okay. Social worker. So this is your audience for today, and we appreciate you all responding to our polls. With that being said, I am going to turn it over now to our presenters, Susan, Angela, and Sarah, and let them tell you a little bit more about themselves and what they're going to do. Ladies?
Great, thank you so much, Maria. On behalf of Susan, Angela, and myself, I just want to thank so many participants for signing on today. We're very excited to be talking to you about early motor delays and how to make 0 to 3 count for children with cerebral palsy. Today we're going to be talking about early motor delays and cerebral palsy. We're going to be talking about the impact of early identification and diagnosis, and we're going to be talking about family context for the recommendations that we're making. And just as Maria mentioned, I think it is our hope that we are making this as interactive as possible. I think that though we're all calling in from our least restrictive environments, whether you're on the way to be meeting with another client or calling from the CFC office or you're at home, I think we really want to have this sense that we're all here together having a conversation about what are some of the more difficult aspects of taking care of young children with disabilities. So throughout the presentation, if we give you a little bit of a prompt, either through the message chat box or through our question on the screen, please type in your responses. We're going to be very interested in making this a discussion. Okay, so first I want to start and talk about red flags in those first couple of months. So early motor delays, I'm hearing look at it. There's a lot of feedback, double sound. Maybe I'll turn the mic down a little bit, and Martha, I'm going to hope that helps a little bit. So in the 0 to 3 month range, red flags include any baby that's having difficulty lifting their head. When we see young babies, they should be having spontaneous, small, fidgety movements of all joints. So when we see kids who have stiff legs with little movements, they're keeping their hands fisted, especially towards like the older end of this range. And then babies that push their head back while lying on their back. In a little bit of the older age group, 4 to 6 months, we want to be looking especially at positioning and movements that babies make when we're moving positions. So babies that sit with a rounded back, when we bring them into a supported stand, how they hold their arms back and have stiff legs, and babies that are not yet bringing their arms forward to reach out are all red flags. I'm hoping that many of you had a chance to look at pathways.org, both at the handout that was sent out to you and on the videos online. There are just really some fabulous videos that this organization has put together, which show side-by-side comparisons of babies who have typical motor movement for the age and then warning signs for cerebral palsy. And they do a nice job of kind of breaking that out by age group as well. Early motor delays 7 to 9 months. So any baby that's using one hand predominantly at this young age, that can be a concern, or using one side of the body to move. Babies at this age should be transferring toys from one hand to the other. And you know, they should be using arms while sitting, and at this age be starting to crawl, and certainly be taking the weight on their legs when putting them in a supported standing position. At 10 to 12 months, the red flags that we should be keeping our eyes out for, babies who are using only their arms to pull to standing. Anytime there's asymmetries, so sitting with one weight to one side or using one hand over the other. Certainly if there's poor head control at this stage, that is a major red flag, and babies should be, you know, flexible in their movements and not have sort of strongly flexed or stiffly extended legs and arms. In the 13 to 18 month range, we want babies to be taking steps independently, and so if they are not yet, that can be a red flag, although not necessarily at 13 months. We know there are several reasons why kids may walk on their toes, but we should be paying attention to that. And then from a kind of more of an OT perspective, kids who are using, not using pincer grasp at this late age, that is a big concern. So cerebral palsy is a really heterogeneous condition. Any number of neurological disorders, they appear in early infancy, permanently affect body movement and muscle coordination. It does not worsen over time, so it's considered to be non-progressive, although we certainly know that there are sort of sequelae from cerebral palsy that can develop over time, but the disorder itself or the damage itself does not worsen, and it's caused by abnormalities in the part of the brain that control muscle movements. The majority of children with cerebral palsy are born with it, but it may not be detected until later, and usually signs are detected by 3 years of age. Abnormalities we can think of, so I just wanted to define some terms that you are likely familiar with or have heard. Muscle coordination when performing voluntary movements is, when there's difficulty with that, that's called ataxia. Stiff or tight muscles and exaggerated reflexes is called spasticity. And then muscle tone, either too stiff or hypertonic or too floppy, hypotonic, is we can see both even in the same child with cerebral palsy. So I wanted just to define terms again of subtypes of cerebral palsy. There's actually a very rare fourth subtype, which is triplegia, not represented here, but for the most part, we can talk about kids having one of 3 types. Diplegia, meaning the most affected areas are the lower extremities. Hemiplegia, the most affected areas being the one side of the body, and then quadriplegia referring to all 4 limbs affected. And what I like about this diagram is that although there's a predominance in certain limbs, there is still some effect to other parts of the body. What I don't think is exactly perfect about this diagram is that there's total, it's kind of ignoring the effect of the head. And so I would say that really in any type of cerebral palsy, there can be effect on the motor movements and control of the mouth, which we know affects eating and affects speech, and we really should be thinking about that for any child who's been diagnosed with cerebral palsy. I actually just had a child last week. I diagnosed with diplegia, and his difficulty with speech and eating, I think, is related. Just thinking about a major motor milestone that a lot of families ask about. With diplegia, we expect about 90% of these kids to walk. With hemiplegia, all of them to walk. And then for quadriplegia, about a fourth are going to ultimately walk. And when we think about which of the kids that we see in a young age will ultimately walk, of those who are able to get to a self-supported sit by 2 years of age, we can predict that those children are going to ultimately go on to walk. And of course, 100% of children with cerebral palsy learn, and we're going to talk about different ways we can support them learning. Okay, so now some time for some interactive voting. So how common is cerebral palsy in the U.S.? Go ahead and use your voting box. Is it 264,000 adults and children, 564,000, 764,000, or about 1 million adults and children in the U.S.?
Make sure that you are using that 4th box under your name, which is the polling function. And we'll give folks a few seconds to identify what their choices are. fourth box for the polling function. In order for us to be able to pull the data, is to use that box, and should have a little A in it. All right, Alyssa, let's see what we've got. Okay, so Sarah, it looks like the majority of folks thought about 500,000, with the next highest one being about C, 764. So I'll let us know what the answer is.
All right, so you know, great, you guys are in the ballpark. So about 764,000 children currently have CP, and of that, about 10,000 babies are born each year with cerebral palsy, which means that about in terms of preschool age children, about 1,200 to 1,500 are diagnosed every year. In terms of the risk factors divided by prematurity, among babies born at term, the rate of cerebral palsy is about 1 per 1,000. In the late preterm population, 32 to 36 weeks, the rate is 10 per 1,000. Very preterm, which is 28 to 31 week gestation, is 70 to 70 per 1,000. And then among the extreme preterm population, that's 23 to 27 week babies, the rate is 100 to 160 per 1,000. And what I just want to touch on for a second while we're on this slide is that, of course, the inverses show us that the vast majority of children born premature, even in the most extreme preterm group, do not ultimately have cerebral palsy. So even among those born at 23 to 27 weeks, 840 to 900 out of every 1,000 babies born at that early age do not ultimately have cerebral palsy, although we should be certainly thinking about it among all these populations. So most children born prematurely do not have cerebral palsy. I think that's a major misconception, especially among, you know, our groups that kind of see a lot of kids that are at greater risk for motor disability. And most cerebral palsy is mild. About a fourth of children diagnosed with cerebral palsy are going to have quadriplegia, and then a smaller percentage of that will be the severest form. Okay, so next we're going to talk about appreciating the impact of early identification and diagnosis, and to start us off with on this topic, I want to turn the microphone over to Angela.
Hello everyone, I am Nathan's mom, and I'm going to share a little of our story with you today, this afternoon. My Nathan was born on July 15th, 2006. He weighed 2 pounds and 1 ounce, and he was born at 26 weeks gestation. It was unknown why he came so suddenly and so early, and he obviously had a wealth of problems to deal with because of that. He had heart surgery at 7 days old. He had bilateral grade 2 brain bleeds, which eventually progressed to grade 3. He spent almost 3 months on a ventilator because he was retaining a lot of fluid, and that was taxing on all of his systems. He had many other complications and scares throughout his NICU stay, but he was eventually discharged home with us after 125 days. I have a background in early intervention. I was a service coordinator and developmental therapist while I was in graduate school. So I had my own little power team of providers that I knew and trusted, all lined up to evaluate Nathan right after his hospital discharge. Due to his adjusted age at that time, he wasn't presenting with any delays, so what we decided was that he would just be monitored monthly by an occupational therapist, but after 3 months, the delays started showing, so he did qualify for direct services from all 4 of the main disciplines. Our EI team was such an amazing resource for us, especially during Nathan's first year, which was our hardest. His struggles were becoming more and more apparent throughout that time. He had so many doctor visits and therapy appointments. We spent a lot of time researching what could be going on with him, ways to help him. We had so many questions about the future. It was pretty much exhausting. We lived almost 2 hours away from any family. My husband and I both worked full time. I had really strong feelings while Nathan was still in the NICU that he would eventually be dealing with a lifelong diagnosis. As soon as that grade 2 bleed progressed to grade 3 bilaterally, I just got that sinking feeling. But, you know, that first year his therapists weren't talking about it, his doctors weren't talking about it, and my husband and I were kind of afraid to ask. But eventually we knew it was time, and we sought out a pediatric physiatrist who eventually diagnosed Nathan with CP at 18 months.
So I think now we wanted to bring a question, you know, to the group, which is to talk about how, as you know, as a bunch of us are EI providers on the call, how do we talk to parents about diagnosis when they have questions? And I wanted to kind of put this thought out there, which is that, you know, which Angela touched on, which is that most parents have an accurate sense of their child's diagnosis, even if they're not saying it. So I wanted to pose that question to the group. I saw there were some other responses already, which look great. It sounds like Mary shared that she covers basics and then referring to a physician for specifics. I'm sorry, there looks like a last name there. Stella Savich mentioned that she will ask parents what their questions are and help to kind of refer them to different resources. I think that one of the hard things can be, as I've worked with different EI providers, that sometimes parents will ask, what do you think? Do you think my child has X, Y, Z?
Sarah, it looks like there are a few people that are still typing. So
great.
Yeah.
Great. And this is a big question. This is a big question, and so, you know, it's really meant to be thought-provoking more than anything else.
You know, I will just tell you that I had, when Trevor was little, you know, we had suspicions as well, but it wasn't until we saw an orthopedist that he said, with his CP, da-da-da-da-da, and that really threw me off guard because obviously we knew we had Trevor had delays, but Trevor was about 3 before somebody actually said the word cerebral palsy to us, which was it really kind of took us aback. All right. We can see if there are other responses that are coming in, but we'll let you. We can address them as they finish up their typing.
Yeah, that sounds great. As we were talking and preparing for this, I think that my sense is that sometimes EI providers are concerned about what the response might be if they shared their diagnostic concern. Sometimes EI providers are concerned about being wrong or that they're not the correct person to be making an official diagnosis, so they're hesitant to give that diagnostic term to parents. Sometimes EI providers share that they're afraid their relationship with the parent will change if they are the first person to raise a concern. Great. So Nancy's sharing that most parents have info on the child's diagnosis.
Looks like Bethany's also talking about referring to the specialist that's working with the child when you're an associate level provider.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Talking about referring to the service coordinator. Questions.
I'm sorry for the silence. I just want to read the responses, which I would be listening to if we were in the same room.
Well, I can read them out too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that Joan is talking about that she asked what they've been told. Let them know that we don't diagnose, but we are aware of what the symptoms are.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, you know, I think that certainly there are different specialists that give a formal diagnosis, but I think, you know, something that we've just been talking about, and I would love to continue the dialogue, is how do you broker a conversation that isn't, I think your child has CP, but something that kind of gets the ball moving in terms of getting that child to a diagnosis, and also validates the concerns that parents have. So as a provider who does give diagnoses, and I'll say that I have far more experience with some of the more common developmental disabilities such as autism, but certainly have given diagnoses of cerebral palsy as well, is that sometimes parents come and say, well, gosh, the EI provider said it wasn't this, that, or the other, which, you know, of course is, you know, lots of parents interpret and misinterpret different things. And so it's really tricky, and it's a really tricky position to be in, but I think is an important dialogue to figure out how can we support parents in their diagnostic concerns without feeling like we are, you know, sort of overstepping our comfort zone as providers. Yeah, no, it is very hard to kind of address parents' concerns. Absolutely.
I like how Pat kind of reiterates the fact that most parents have some awareness of the possible diagnosis, but once you say the words, then it makes it real.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that, and as someone who has really the privilege of being with families as we work through that initial diagnostic conversation, I will say that is very, very often the case, is that as we're getting the history, the diagnostic term is not coming up by the parent, but once I give the diagnosis and we have a conversation about the diagnosis, it's very evident that that parent actually thought and expected that would be the case, but they didn't want to be the one to sort of discuss it. So very, very thoughtful responses. Well, let's move on to next topics, because we have lots of things to discuss here. So going back to our little Nathan, who's grown up here in 2009.
Thank you. So back to Nathan. We moved closer to our family around Nathan's second birthday. We moved from a 3-story home to a 1-story home to accommodate his growing collection of specialized equipment. We started envisioning that he would be a full-time wheelchair user. We said goodbye to his first team of EI providers who had become like family. Although I'm a school psychologist, sorry, I forgot to advance my slides here, so now they have not much to do with what I'm talking about. But although I'm a school psychologist and I help families transition from EI to the school system all of the time, beginning the school transition process for my own son, of course, was terrifying. One thing I would recommend to EI providers, if it's a possibility for you, is to accompany parents to a school-based evaluation or an initial IEP meeting. I see that as so helpful to families that I'm working with when they're coming from EI to the school system, to have that support of their EI team. At that point, you guys know them best, even though it becomes the school team making the educational decisions, and I think it helps the family feel so much more comfortable with that huge transition. We explored many different options for Nathan, but we ultimately decided on a specialized school. That setting allowed us access to so many other families whose children presented with similar needs, and that ended up turning into such an amazing support system for us. We now socialize together, we share resources, and we even plan for the future together. Throughout the years, we've tried many different medical, therapeutic, and holistic interventions for Nathan. While he was in EI, he began aquatic therapy, and that's him with his therapist. He still sees the same PT for both land-based and water sessions. He participated in conductive education for 2 years. He loves therapeutic horseback riding. He still does that every spring and fall. We've tried hyperbaric oxygen therapy, craniosacral therapy, music therapy, Botox, essential oils, massage. He has a G-tube for supplemental feeding and a baclofen pump to help control his spasticity. Through it all, we found peace and acceptance. There's certainly no one thing that was magical for Nathan over the years. All the pieces were important in our journey, but overall his best form of therapy has been his little sister. She was born when he was 6, and she encourages him to talk and assert himself. She also stops us from giving him his way all of the time. Nathan's now a happy, healthy 9-year-old boy. He has a zest for life that most people notice and envy. He absolutely loves music. He's saying new words all of the time. He's especially motivated by singing along with his favorite rock songs. He's learning to use a power chair and an eye gaze communication device. Basically, our main goal is to promote joy and to give Nathan as many experiences as possible. So thank you for listening to me ramble. If anyone has any questions for me about Nathan, I'm happy to answer them now or at the end, whatever you feel most comfortable with.
Hi, Angela. This is Mickey, one of the facilitators. So one question that's come up for you specifically is, were there therapies, strategies you tried that seemed particularly helpful for Nathan? And then a question for the group is, when we were talking about parents, a lot of it was trying to figure out how to answer parents when they wanted you as therapists or whoever to help them with a diagnosis. What are some strategies when you think the child, or pretty confident the child has, say, CP or has autism, but you feel like the parent isn't there yet? So kind of both questions. And maybe Angela, you could go first talking about Nathan and therapies, and then maybe Sarah or either one of you join in about what to do when you push parents about a diagnosis.
Sure. Yeah, I'll answer for Nathan. You know, all of the more holistic kind of things, I would say, did not specifically help Nathan. We didn't see any change after craniosacral or hyperbaric oxygen treatments, things like that. We found that for Nathan, when he's excited about something, his tone kicks in and he gets spastic. And so he loves swimming and he loves horseback riding, but it's difficult for him to regulate his tone when he is super excited about those things. But obviously over time, his excitement level isn't as high, isn't at the same level. So it took some time trying those things, but now both of those work to help reduce his tone, which is great. He does best when his tone is not at such an elevated level. So for him, that has worked. In terms of feeding, which was an early big issue for us, he literally couldn't figure out how to open his mouth for the spoon for a long time. We gave him a lot of verbal prompts and physical prompts, and that seemed to help. And I would say he was, from infant, typical kind of feeding age, all the way probably till age 2 to 3, where that was an issue. And now it's a complete non-issue. He can open his mouth when he wants to. So I hope that answers your question. If you want me to answer something more specific, let me know.
No, that's great. And if you'd look in the chat while maybe Sarah's talking about pushing parents about diagnosis, there's several questions for you about Nathan that maybe then we can come back to.
Great, I will do that.
Sure. So I can touch on the question, which is a great one, about when you as the provider have concerns, but you're not sure that that's where the parents are at in terms of thinking of diagnosis. And as I think about that process, I think I struggle with myself as I am spending a couple of hours with a family for the first time, but ultimately we'll be giving them a diagnosis in that first time of meeting the families. And my approach, which I think works potentially in the experience in the field, working with the family as a therapist as well, is that I usually ask a number of different questions to try to allow the parent a space to share more of their concerns, or for them to bring up the diagnosis first. And so that could be something like, you know, I think that your son's making a lot of great progress. Have you thought more about why it's been harder for him to hold his head up, sit up, you know, et cetera, and give that parent some space to say, yeah, I've thought a lot about, you know, why it is, or, oh, this person mentioned cerebral palsy, but just saying, like, have you guys read or thought about anything? Is there anything that you're worried about? I ask that a lot. Is there a diagnosis you're worried about, or is there something that you're worried about? And even if you as the EI provider don't feel and aren't in a position to say, yes, you're on the right track or not, I think hearing that concern and saying, well, gosh, how can we get you to someone who can answer that question? Maybe we need a medical diagnostic. Maybe we need to get the pediatrician to do another referral. But I like to work within the EI system, so medical diagnostic would be my route of choice. But asking more questions about what the parents are worried about. Have they thought more? Have they read more? Have they talked to anyone? And in my experience, of course, I have the experience from being at a medical diagnostic appointment, but in my experience, a lot of times those additional questions, maybe I've asked it the third time, is when a parent will say, well, yes, I'm actually concerned with cerebral palsy, or, oh, my grandma thought it was autism, or, sort of bring things up. Okay, turning back over to Angela.
Well, and I see, that Angela's been answering questions, or some of them on the chat room, so depending on how you all are feeling with time, she can either continue doing those in the chat, or however you want to handle it, Sarah, to keep moving along.
I think it's a good question.
I think we have some nice time and space here for Angela to answer some questions aloud, Angela, if that's helpful to you. Because I think there's so much interest around Nathan's story. So,
sure, thank you. Yeah, I've been typing a few things, but I think the first question was when he started horseback riding therapy. That was at about age 4. Now it took a little longer before we were able to get a consistent schedule, but now he does it twice a year for like 6 to 8 week stints. There's a great question about equipment needs, and I referenced that we will be talking about that later. The concern about timing, were the needs initiated too early or too late for us specifically as a family? So I'll be happy to talk about that later when we get to the equipment discussion, because that's, I think, just like diagnosis, it's another touchy discussion for sure. There's a question about his baclofen pump. We were warned it's not, it's not a cure for spasticity, and absolutely he still has some very, very spastic moments, and our experience, I think, is a little outside of the norm because although he's had the pump for 2 years, we are still not as regulated as us or his medical team would like him to be, so I think his tone is just very difficult to control. So typically you would go for pump refills every 3 months or so, and we're going, I would say it's a good stint if we make it 6 weeks without going back to get his dose adjusted. And they're playing with, giving him larger doses or a bolus at different points in time. And so it's still a kind of a hot issue and very involved, but we're still amazed with how much better it has made his quality of life. There were moments that we couldn't get him in his chair. I was in tears because he was that stiff, and I'm crying and he's crying, and it was awful. And so we've certainly taken the edge off of his tone, and that's been life-changing. He started using his kid walker when he was about 4. We have lost that ability now with the pump, so that was one negative, that he doesn't have enough tone in his legs anymore to use it. So it's a loss, but we're still feeling like it's a win because of the pump and how much more comfortable it has made him. He got his first communication device right after he left EI. So they started the paperwork, and we actually didn't get it delivered until after his 3rd birthday. He started with a springboard light, and he used a 2-switch auditory scan because he cannot do direct access. Just this year, we have moved away from that, and we've tried many different things with that. We went to 1-switch and a bunch of different things, but he currently has a Toby eye gaze communication device, and so we're learning it. He's getting there. let's see, his very first therapy, I think, was at about 6 months because we did that initial eval, and he didn't really qualify because his adjusted age was like, you know, a few weeks or a month or whatever. But then that next round, 3 months later, he did qualify for everything, DT, OT, PT, speech.
Okay, sounds great. I'm going to stop you, Angela, and ask you to type in if you see other questions that are specific for you. That'd be great. And I'm going to ask Sarah for the group to keep going just because we don't want to run out of time at the end. So that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you for moving us along. So now I'm going to turn it over to Susan to talk about Ray.
Hi, I'm Susan, but feel free to just call me Ray's mom. You can see him here at about 4 weeks old, or -1 month adjusted in your language, since he was born at 32 weeks and 2 days. At least that's how the delivering physician put it. Angela's and my story will probably have some familiar characteristics to you. Premature birth, abnormal muscle tone, knowing something was wrong in our hearts before any formal diagnosis was made, many appointments, much searching, grieving, and moving forward with reset expectations. So the list of common traits is really long, but I've been reminded during our collaboration that each story is really unique and deserves its own consideration. So here's a little tour through our own experience. Now, I don't think the next slide is going to disturb anyone in this audience, but I do share it to provide a baseline. Here is Ray at about 5 minutes old. He was born 2 pounds 11 ounces on November 20th, 2009. And to my husband and me, he was absolutely beautiful. But looking back, I have to adjust my eyes just to make sure that he wasn't actually born a frog. He was so tiny with those little spindly legs and arms and twig-like fingers. It was deceptive. Ray spent a little over 2 months in the NICU before coming home. And while there, an MRI revealed that Ray had a cyst on the left side of his brain and some staining from what was apparently a mild brain bleed. It happened either before, during, or after birth, as the neurologist helpfully explained. The neurologist, he saw no abnormalities in Ray's behavior or reflexes in the NICU, so he was optimistic about Ray's prospects for a normal life, and we left the NICU feeling really lucky. This is Ray and I at our first visit to the NICU follow-up clinic in March of 2010. Ray was developing just fine, and we were thrilled about that. And here he is at May of 2010. As you can see, both hands are fisting, and apparently this is totally normal. He's only 4 months adjusted here, and so there's no signs of anything wrong yet. Interestingly, just prior to this photo being taken, we had a follow-up with the neurologist who, while evaluating Ray, commented that all babies are left-handed. I honestly didn't give it another thought until I relayed the story during Ray's first EI evaluation. Kim, the evaluating OT, raised an eyebrow. Really, she said, I've never heard of that all babies are left-handed. I didn't give it another thought, but she began monthly appointments anyways with Ray because he was delayed. By July, when Ray was about 6 months adjusted, his listing became more pronounced and he was holding his right hand tightly, fisting, while his left hand functioned as normal. My sister had given me a book about children ages 0 to 5 years, which had become my Bible. I relied heavily on this book. So when I looked up, quote-unquote, fist, there it was, plain as day. Ray was showing classic signs of cerebral palsy. Reading this caused a sinking feeling like none other, and I showed my husband that very night. Of course, we tried to table the idea and continue our mission of helping Ray sit up, gain core strength, learn to roll, all as prescribed by Kim, our OT from EI. Here is Ray and I at the NICU follow-up clinic in August. Ray, aside from general delays, crawled in a lopsided manner then, and he couldn't grasp with his right hand. The therapists left the room, and I could hear whispering in the hallway. I knew what they were talking about, and they knew what they were seeing but couldn't tell me. So when they re-entered the room, they said our next appointment would be in just a couple of months rather than waiting 6 months, and they would like Dr. Gabler from RIC to see Ray then. I asked at that point, pretty bluntly, I said, does Ray have cerebral palsy? They couldn't or wouldn't tell me, and it was pretty excruciating. My husband and I had a pretty quiet evening that night, each withdrawing into our private corners, trying to comprehend what we knew was coming. And this was taken in October. This was taken in October, about 3 weeks before Ray's diagnosis from Dr. Gabler, who, after about 10 minutes with Ray, she said very kindly, "Your son has cerebral palsy, right-sided hemiplegia." And she paused and said thoughtfully, "It's mild." As you can see from the photo, it's not difficult to see that something was off. Her face brightened as she explained that there was much we could do to help Ray, because it's a very dynamic time in research. We almost felt lucky again. She recommended reading a book called The Brain That Changes Itself, and the next thing I knew, Ray had a cast that he would wear for 2 weeks that November. At 11 months adjusted, Ray was on his first course of CIMT, passive restraint, cast worn all waking hours, and by then our EIOT was coming once weekly and PT every 2 weeks, and we were quote unquote working with Ray every day. Our experience with EI was absolutely amazing and comprehensive. We had an OT, PT, and an SLP who were so committed to helping Ray reach his potential. We will never know how Ray would have developed had we not intervened, and I'd like to think all of these therapies made a big difference. At the start, I thought that Ray could actually repair some of the damage to his brain or find new pathways. The therapists, both from EI and other sources, were so optimistic about Ray's progress. Ray worked really hard in his first few years, mostly because we could manipulate him at that age. However, I now understand that we are working only to maintain Ray's physical abilities because even mild CP can't be overcome. Learning and processing this was another milestone on the emotional roller coaster of raising a child with a disability. Now we are committed to helping Ray further develop the abilities he was born with while maintaining his right-sided functionality. In addition to his weekly PT, OT, and SLP appointments, Ray would do an average of 2 3-week courses of CIMT per year. This included therapy appointments 5 days a week or a CIMT camp at RIC. The cast was worn all waking hours or 24/7, depending on whom we were working with. Inevitably, when the cast came off, his left hand would snap back to dominance. We'd feel pretty deflated. Of course, despite feelings, we pressed on, trusting the experts. We added a night splint and a knee immobilizer when Ray was 2 1/2, worn all sleeping hours. Beyond EI therapies and CIMT camps, Ray did therapeutic riding 30 minutes a week until we couldn't afford it anymore. And then we did acupuncture twice monthly for a year until we couldn't afford it anymore. And here's the summer of 2013, more constraint therapy. And of course, we always looked for two-handed activities to do at home and looking for sensory activities like making a mess of dinner, or maybe that's just making a mess of dinner. And more constraint-induced movement therapy. We were lucky because we had a supportive and nurturing daycare provider. They were really patient, but they expected Ray to participate and keep up to the best of his abilities. Sarah?
Yeah, so thank you so much for sharing the story. And I think what we want to segue into next is thinking about the family context for recommendations.
So one of the only low points in my experience with EI was when a very well-intended therapist connected me to another mom of a child with hemiplegia. She thought we might have an opportunity to bond, which I thoroughly appreciated because, as we know, living with a disability can cause feelings of isolation. In her setup, she explained that this mom had quit her job to dedicate herself more fully to her daughter's care, and her daughter was doing so well. So I'm sure you can read the subtext here. I heard, Susan, if only you would quit your job and were more dedicated, Ray would be doing much better. This really killed me. I did meet this mom and her daughter, and she was a superstar, and her daughter was doing extremely well. So by comparison, I felt like a failure for several months, and I pushed myself even harder to take time off of work to be with Ray, asking my husband to do more in the corners of the day. Later that year, Ray was working with a therapist who also worked with this young girl, and that therapist told me, oh, Sarah's hand was never affected like Ray's. It was her leg and foot that caused her problems. I should never have thought that Ray and Sarah would ever have similar outcomes. They both might have mild CP, but they presented differently. So I have to say that the connecting therapist, by suggesting that Ray might be doing better like Sarah, was not only a little mistaken, but a little hurtful. So all parents of kids compare, and even though we know it's wrong to do it. And you probably know that parents of kids like ours carry a special kind of guilt, and we're pretty vulnerable to any suggestions that we could do more, better, or different. I know this is an especially challenging aspect of your job because all families are so different. I simply ask you to be sensitive to that fact. So, back to Ray, age 3. I'm happy to say that when he aged out of EI, he was in the 90th percentile for fine motor, 30th percentile delayed on gross motor, and average in speech. But another story emerges here because Ray at around age 3, was becoming more of his own person. He developed a coping mechanism of flaking out when he didn't want to take direction. So hence, many sessions were contests of wills. We still kept our appointments, although often time was lost to discipline. We kept going, modifying Ray's treatment plan year by year. At age 4 and 5, as Ray developed socially and emotionally, we had other questions that came into play. For example, is swim therapy better for Ray, which is shown on the left-hand side, or are group swim lessons better on slide right? Does he benefit from one-on-ones, or does he need some peer pressure to take the next step forward? Also, is it better for Ray to have fun at therapy or maybe get less of a workout? Or is it better to have a more diligent therapist that pushes him harder? Of course, in the ideal situation, we'd have both diligence and fun. However, it's rare to find the perfect blend. So if you have to pick, which is more important? Sarah?
Yeah, so along that note, we wanted to talk about some ways that you adapt your therapy recommendations for families.
So this is Angela. I'll chime in here for a second. Something that, 2 things actually, that worked really well for us. After Nathan turned 2 and we moved home closer to family, he was cared for during the day by my sister. And right at that time, his therapies also increased to twice a week for his speech and OT and PT. So we worked it out with a therapist that they would do 1 session a week with my sister at her house during the day and then 1 session a week with us in our home. And it was such a great way to make sure that all of his primary caregivers were hearing the same recommendations. We also kept a therapy notebook, which traveled with Nathan to my sister's house and back to our house, where each of the therapists would just write, not a whole summary of their session, but maybe 1 aha moment or 1 thing that was hard for him or 1 thing they wanted us to do for the week. And then the providers loved it for each other, that they would read each other's notes. But that was a nice way to keep us all connected in terms of recommendations and progress.
I know I'll chime in here as well, because I remember having the same kind of notebook and having my parents watching Trevor one time, and they found the notebook and was able to learn a lot of things that they wouldn't come up in just general conversation. They got to know Trevor based on some of the things that the therapist had written. It was really, really awesome.
We're having some nice comments roll in. I like Mary's comments on what the family's interests are, if they're outdoorsy.
Like we've also got Martha talking about how after they determine the strategy that worked for the child, picking the most critical, asking family what would work for them to do daily, and then a lot about seeing what's realistic, which is really important. It sounds great in theory, but sometimes in reality it doesn't always work. Allowing options to increase and decrease services is tolerated by family. Nathan's mom saying that making therapy fun makes it seem less like therapy, and that is a huge thing as well. Let's see what else do we have here, Sarah.
I liked Susan's story too of when possible, trying to integrate some sort of typical child activities that are in fact therapeutic. So if the swim lesson can be utilized to help to support some of the therapy needs, that's often preferred to kind of solo swim therapy.
Looks a lot of folks are talking about realistic activities and I guess skill making activities that are fun. Exercise programs with visuals fitting into families' routines and their space at home. Lots of tummy time suggestions, music and siblings.
Yes, using the sibling, that is great too.
So we've got quite a few responses coming in, Sarah.
Yeah, no, this is fabulous, and it's really helpful to make this interactive.
I can see a lot of good therapists are in the room.
Absolutely.
I think I caught most of them as they were coming through. So, although here's another one popped in, Sherry's talking about more manipulative activities, encouraging to go outside for sun and expanding the view of other things that move. Taking pictures on their phone so they can remember the positions and activities, and keeping family schedule in mind. So, lots of great.
That's a good one.
All right, I think I caught you up.
Great. So, I think that this conversation about thinking about the family context and the child within their family and community fits very nicely into this international classification of function, which has really looking at a disorder, but really not limited to the body function and structure, but really the child's ability to participate in activities and in communities, and thinking about their personal and environmental factors is really critical. And obviously our big goal is that a child has, I love this slide, and I can turn it back over to you, Susan, but a balance between what's fun and what's work, and with the really family and child in mind.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, so this is Ray's current PT, Rose McCrane. She does an outstanding job of unlocking his imagination. She sparks him physically, doesn't let him pop out, and motivates him to try hard. She makes recommendations to us that are really clear and reasonable. For example, she asks that Ray wear his night splint and knee immobilizer while we're prepping dinner at a more aggressive stance. And so it's 20 minutes while we're watching dinner, while we're making dinner and doing other things, so it's just really easy to do. She also uses like permanent marker on the straps of Ray's night splint to show us exactly how much tension to apply. And that helps us a lot too, because she lays it out super plainly, and she doesn't talk over us. Kindergarten has brought new challenges to light, and because we have to prioritize with the little time we have during the week, therapies have been put on the back burner a bit so that we can help Ray academically. He needs more help than most to learn. He needs a little more sleep than he gets. He has trouble focusing, and he needs to learn to work more independently with less prompting and redirection. And he quickly tires of sensory bombardment, which is exactly how I would describe his kindergarten class with 32 kids. Welcome to CPS. So what I've learned, however, is that in my fervor to find the very best resources for Ray and to push him to therapeutic activities, we've almost risked losing the light in him. Ray has endured so much rigorous coaching that he began to tune out to cope. I've learned that this stuff matters, but it's not the whole story. I'm on to raising the whole child now rather than being his personal therapist and chauffeur. This is a good thing, I think, but it does come with guilt because we don't push quite as hard as we used to. However, Ray needs more than a functional hand. He needs friendship. And he needs to extend himself and be available to others. He needs to play in the dirt. He needs to be silly. He needs to be cherished for who he is within a community. He needs to be part of a family. And yes, he needs to strike a very natural pose as the Statue of Liberty. After all, she's the ultimate example of tucking one arm with the other extended. And everyone knows she's perfect just the way she is.
Okay, this is Mickey again. Love the emphasis on social emotional and the importance of peers and siblings and friendships and turn-taking and playfulness. One thing that I heard you mention a couple times, and I think this was probably you more so, Susan, but maybe Angela, you might have mentioned this too, was finances and resources that, you know, what you as a family have had to do. And I wonder if you feel comfortable talking about that for a couple minutes, of accessing resources for communication systems or therapies, and how you go about that, or how as a therapist or support staff we help families navigate that.
I'll chime in. This is Angela. I mean, one piece for sure is huge, and we're going to get to this a little more about equipment, but, you know, early intervention funding for equipment is tricky, I know, but on some level easier than insurance. So, you know, as much as you can maximize for your families before turning 3, I'm sure you guys are always thinking about that. Nathan, before leaving EI, he did, as I mentioned, get his first communication device funded by EI. He also received a high-low feeding chair, so it was, you know, great for at the table as well as going down low and playing with friends. He also had a stander paid for by early intervention. Since leaving EI, you know, we've primarily accessed private insurance, and many things have been a battle. He does a real food blend through his G-tube as opposed to a formula, and that was almost a year of fighting insurance and getting denials, and finally now it's something that is paid for. The most recent thing, which I did talk about in the chat room, was his Toby communication device, and it was denied by insurance. And we ended up changing insurance plans later, and then it was approved. So some of this is just so dependent on, you know, what your plan looks like. We did feel the need to do a private benefit for Nathan because of financial issues. We had to remodel our bathroom. We bought a changing table that goes up and down. We had to ramp our garage, you know, so many things. And that was, again, a year of planning and stress, but ultimately an awesome, awesome result.
And how about you, Susan? Do you want to add anything about resources for your family or finances and how you navigated that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess for us it's really like we push insurance to the absolute limit, and we try to push as hard as we can to stretch that as far as we can, and then we just budget extra for everything we can afford. I think Angela was saying that some of the more holistic therapies didn't really work as well. For Nathan, I would have to agree. We've tried a lot of experimentation, and we've just done our best to do everything within our financial limits, but our financial limits are what they are. So we just do our very best with the resources that we have.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you. All right.
I want to just chime in for a second on that point to say that as a provider, I want to just encourage the folks on the call that we can be partners in some of this advocacy for more things to be covered. And so I can imagine that there are times when families may shy away from bringing up the financial concerns or the some of the aspects that are not being covered by insurance with their provider, especially given there's so many other things to talk about. But I will definitely say that in my discipline and with my group and colleagues, we are constantly talking about how we can help support families in getting more coverage for the services they need. And I think this actually probably segues really nicely into what we wanted to talk about here, which is that equipment, there's sort of a nice window during the EI period that we wanted to touch base on. But my point is just, we can help be a partner in advocating for this. And I know it's a battle for all families.
Yeah, and I think Maria also put in the chat room that, perseverance, that don't give up and help families, as you said, figure out what are there other alternatives and what else can we do. One thing, too, I can't help but say, Sarah, before I turn it back over to you is I think it was Susan who brought this up, the idea of some maybe experimental things didn't work as well. And as a researcher, I can't help but say, there are lots of strategies out there that people try to sell at times or get people to try curriculum, whatever, that maybe don't have a strong research base. And just being aware of what we suggest to families or what we ourselves use and what's the empirical evidence, the research behind those. And before, we send them out to try them in mass quantity with lots of people. So I can't help but say that. So Sarah, I'll turn it back over to you.
And I'll turn it back over to our moms to just talk a little bit about equipment.
Okay, this is Angela. I could talk first about Nathan. His first piece of actual equipment was a Bannock vest. His OT recommended purchasing one when he was about 8 months old. She said it would help him sit with better posture when in supported sitting. She encouraged us to use our insurance to purchase it because she said if it was ordered through EI, it would take a while. The process with insurance wasn't simple either, and although it was only about $80, I think, I was worried about purchasing it out of pocket because I assumed we would need to purchase a new one every few weeks or months. I knew he was constantly growing out of his clothes, so I thought that would be the same. So it was finally approved through insurance, and he's actually wearing his first Bannock vest in this photo when he's about 4 years old. So I think the takeaway here is to thoroughly explain to families what equipment they'll be getting, show samples whenever possible, and kind of take away that fear and stigma if you can. He's also shown here in his Kid Walk walker. He used it as both a walker and a stander for several years. If you're not familiar, it has a handle in the back, which is height adjustable, and it allowed us to propel him or direct him when needed, and that gave him such a nice sense of independence. And then the last piece of equipment in this photo is actually, and I say equipment lightly, but it's the hand strap that my husband and I made so Nathan can hold his drumstick. So it's just a little Velcro and some strapping material. And a few years there, we did not leave home without it. They actually have a product out now called the Easy Hold, which is awesome and very versatile, and I wish I would have invented it. I'll turn this back to Susan.
Yeah, for us, equipment has been really essential. I think the most dramatic improvements we've seen are through raised leg braces that he's been wearing progressively, more fixed braces as he's gotten older, but we recently went back to a flexed leg brace, and it's just unbelievable how much more freedom he has. With the ability, with a flexible ankle, he can now do things like his micro scooter, which because he couldn't bend his knee before in a flex position, he couldn't do any of those kinds of things. So we've been really, it's unbelievable to me how much a leg brace can do to improve the gait and raise alignment and how his hips square with his shoulders. And if you saw him when he was first starting to walk at like 15, 18 months, dragging his foot in an arched position versus what he is now, it's just kind of incredible what that kind of motor training can do. The other equipment we have are just minor Bannock splints. We've had ones with stays in them, but Our current OTs prefer that he use just the little ones that just keep his thumb anchored, so as not to block a lot of sensory input that he would get. In other words, the ones with the stays cover up more hand, and he doesn't get as much input. So we use the lighter Benic splint that just keeps his thumb anchored right now. And the other thing you can see in the slide is lots of casts, lots and lots of casts. We do that a lot.
Looks like we've got a lot of questions about or comments about clearinghouses and lending libraries for donating equipment, strategies to therapists and techniques with for and kiddos with cerebral palsy. So I don't know if you ladies can address some of that as well. Hello?
We're here. I'm just kind of trying to sift through a little bit.
Sorry, I was reading too. You know, I have not found a great clearinghouse, as somebody mentioned. They have it for like the elderly population. I know they exist, and in other states and countries, I think it's honestly even better than what we have here. I've donated things to people I've met online. I've donated things to Nathan's school. He does his therapies at Marion Joy Hospital in Wheaton, and we've donated things there, and as well as gotten things for loan there because they have their own little in-house lending library. But it sure would be a great resource because honestly, I'm collecting so many things that I can't use anymore, and the more, you know, it sits in my basement and garage, the less useful it is to anybody. So, Alan, you should invent that. Anyway.
Yeah, so it sounds like this is sort of there's some organizations on a local level, but not a bigger organization. Couple questions from Jean. What was the name of the best mat that was used when for a young child under 9 months? Is that the question about the Benic vest? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Great. So let me just, I think we have a couple minutes to open up to a larger questions. Any other, you know, questions that we have? I think that are, you know, we've kind of reached that end of the things that we had planned, but we're really wanting that we're, as parents and as EI providers and other providers, that we really want to kind of meet kids where they are and promote their strengths and address their challenges. And the big picture, of course, is that babies need to be loved and find joy in their life, be part of communities. So how can we support those goals? And I think we have a lot of really wonderful folks on the line doing great work all over the state. It's been a pleasure to talk to everyone.
It does look like we kind of have addressed a lot of the questions related for Susan and Sarah and Angela. Question about a presentation to be able to view. You know, we do load these on our EI training website, Facebook page. So you can look on Facebook and YouTube page as where we load them up. You can certainly go back. It takes a couple weeks for us to get it processed through, but all of our webinars are available on those two pages. So if you're not sure where our Facebook or YouTube pages are, go to our website. I put the link in there earlier, and it'll link right to those. So with that, I just want to thank our presenters today. Parents are great. Susan, you're awesome. Angela, great stories. Gorgeous pictures of Nathan and Ray. Sarah, it's great to have the perspective of developmental pediatrician and kind of being able to balance those two things. We certainly appreciate your time, all of your time spent with us. And I know for those of you who aren't aware, Angela's at school and they have been having power fluctuations, and she was worried that her power was going to go off in the middle of her talking. So we were very glad that it didn't do that. Also, just kind of a reminder for folks that you will get an email from the EI training program at illinois.edu with the survey for you to complete to get your certificate. Once you complete that survey, you should get your certificate within 24 hours. If you don't, check your junk mailbox. But also, if you don't, you can also email the training program and they can investigate for you. With that being said, here are a couple of our addresses here. We also have a Twitter page, so you can check that out as well. With that being said, this will conclude our webinar for today. Thank you for our participants for all of the information and questions and comments that you have shared. Everyone have a great day. Thank you.